Hi, my name is Rodney Clark, Vice President of IoT and Mixed Reality Sales here at Microsoft. I'm happy to welcome you today to an important conversation on security and IoT. As organizations figure out how to deliver and enable connected products and processes around the world, most often remotely, we're seeing the IoT landscape rapidly change. And out of this change, a few key questions emerge. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Merritt Maxim, Vice President and Research Director from Forrester, who will talk us through the evolving landscape in IoT and the role that security is playing. So Merritt, welcome to the call.
Thanks for having me, Rodney. Happy to be here.
Well, we're super excited to hear from you. So why don't we just jump right in? Why don't you start telling us a little bit about yourself and the current market trends that you're seeing in IoT?
Absolutely. So yeah, Merritt Maxim, Vice President and Research Director of Forrester. In that role, I manage a team of analysts who cover a broad range of security technologies, including IoT security, endpoint security, and identity and access management. And prior to becoming Research Director, I was an analyst at Forrester for 5 years, where my coverage area included IoT security. And certainly in my role as analyst and even as Research Director, IoT continues to be a high level of interest from all of our clients as they look how to better operate and manage their businesses, whether it's operationally or find new ways to connect and engage with customers. And so this is definitely a high growth area that's in demand from clients really in all industries, not just those in, say, heavy manufacturing, but even service-based companies are looking at the role that IoT can help them in better engage and retain customers, which is increasingly important in a more competitive business environment.
Yeah, Merritt, everything you said there is absolutely the same read that I'm getting in the IoT space. In fact, a lot of the companies that we work with, partners and customers, are going through this architectural design process, and they have parallel motions in developing and building out the business processes to marry up and match with the architectural design. We at Microsoft like to think of that as tech intensity, where a lot of these companies who weren't traditional software companies are employing and utilizing the services of devs and engineers to build their own capability. And then they're also marrying the capability from companies like Microsoft. Are you seeing that type of trend play out, this concept and notion of tech intensity? And what are you hearing from partners and customers around that?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we look at the IoT space, we really have seen that IoT as a capability kind of falls into underlying kind of three primary business scenarios. One would be consume, so using IoT to build connected products that you sell either direct to consumers or to other businesses. There's also the whole aspect of how IoT helps you better operate. So this is the whole connected insight. So whether it's sensors in a factory or airplane engines that send real-time data to the manufacturer, so you can do more predictive and preventive maintenance, and then also the ability to then take those insights to be able to consume those to better understand your buyer's preferences. And that's really been the kind of primary three areas that we've seen IoT driving really throughout my duration at Forrester, and that hasn't really changed particularly now in the pandemic, right? Users' habits are changing, right? Where we are in a more remote environment. So the ability to kind of get real-time analytics about people, say, in a retail outlet, that's not necessarily an option right now. So this is now raising kind of new, I think, priorities around the importance of analytics and how we collect data about consumers and devices and stuff to help us better operate, given some of the constraints that we're now dealing with in the pandemic.
Yeah, as you were talking through the last few areas, and obviously COVID has had a tremendous impact on IoT decisions. It's in some cases it's stalled products in certain industries, and I'm going to come back to the industry point in just a minute. And in some cases, it's accelerated use cases and scenarios. Before we get into industries, one thing that you said reminded me of when companies are making these decisions to build and deploy IoT solutions. Security comes up almost every single time and in almost every single conversation. What are some of the conversations that you're having with your clients and customers and in the industry around security as it relates to building IoT solutions?
Yeah, so I would agree security is a definite concern, but given the kind of continued growth in IoT, we know at least it's does not appear to be inhibiting growth. I mean, companies are aware of the security concerns, but they're either trying to mitigate those concerns or take a risk management approach to figure out what's the acceptable level of risk we're willing to tolerate with going with this, because the business value that we're going to generate is so significant in some of these initiatives that companies can't afford to say we're not going to do it because of a security concern. But certainly there are a range of security features that come into play, particularly in the device itself, in terms of how is data security handled, like how is the data protected at rest, in transit, or in use, and what kind of mechanisms are in place to ensure that there's not unnecessary data leakage, right? And we're seeing this play out right now with some of like the COVID-19 tracing apps and kind of the concerns around that, where there's a valid reason for these apps, but the privacy considerations around these apps is still a mixed bag, and it's raising questions about whether consumers will use them, or if they use them, what protections do they have to ensure that the data is actually being used in an appropriate manner. And so the security concerns continue to be a real challenge. Plus, this is not a monoculture world, in that there's a common device OS that's running everywhere, right? We've got embedded real-time operating systems. We may have Windows machines. We could have, and so you can't apply the same level of protection to every kind of IoT device because they're all different. And so that creates some real challenges for companies to manage them, because they may have a device that meets a very specific business need, but the security of that device may be very challenging. For instance, that device may not be able. Can it be patched, or what is patching required to enable that device? And if the device has to be taken offline for a patch, that might not be sustainable in a manufacturing environment where that actually means downtime is required in order to do the necessary security patch.
Yeah, it's very, very thorough response there. And it's something that we as Microsoft think about and also prioritize from edge, things like Azure Sphere, all the way into services like Azure Security Center. And then also, as you may be aware, we just acquired CyberX, which really allows us to put a solution in place that monitors and manages the vulnerability of those endpoints and devices at scale. So it's an area that we hear a lot from our customers, and we continue to invest in. Let's get back just for a second into industry. You mentioned that in a previous response. What are some of the use cases and priorities that are emerging as you look at the different industry opportunities across IoT?
In our data generally shows the most asset-heavy industries have traditionally been the ones that have led IoT use case. So that would be utilities and telcos, or manufacturing, or oil and gas. Obviously, they've got large assets that are physical assets in the field. They're looking to better understand and optimize the usage of those assets, and that's where there's probably been a lot of the lead adoption. But you do still see service companies. I mean, financial service organizations. Whether it's through connected type services, like it's a voice app or a smart speaker that the user uses to interact with some banking application. There are that's IoT, right? And there's security and another use case there, and consumers are increasingly expecting those types of services. So it's not, while initially it was heavily on the asset oriented industries, we certainly see service industries, or even now in COVID, right, with virtual care, healthcare related applications are emerging as well. So we certainly see those industries will be, I think, accelerating their adoption of that, not just because of COVID, but COVID will certainly be a big catalyst in seeing those types of industries more readily adopt IoT than they have traditionally. And within those industries, right, the use cases kind of fall into a couple of key areas. You either have, I said, what I would kind of call like asset management. So the tracking of the asset, understanding, is it running at the right temperature? Is the oil pressure appropriate? All those kind of things. Again, that's a preventive maintenance story. But there could also be examples of use cases that are more focused on, say, more customer experience types of things. So maybe this allows a more simpler way for you to interface with a service, that you don't have to log in and go through some convoluted process. And so depending on the industry, you see IoT use cases often falling into kind of one of those two buckets. And in both cases, the business value and the potential benefit to the end user is quite significant. And that's why you see such strong adoption of these approaches, because there is real value that can be leveraged by looking at approaches like this.
Absolutely. I agree with everything you said there. So we covered a little bit on industry. We talked a little bit about the importance of security, overall trends in IoT. One of the other things that I've gleaned from my conversations with thousands of partners and customers is that success in IoT boils down to what I call these 4 Ps. And the first one is partnership, the second product, the third being process, and then people and partnerships. It's leveraging this broad ecosystem that we have, and the fact that it takes multiple partners to complete an IoT solution and scenario. In product, it's integrating. It's kind of back to that tech intensity statement I made earlier, integrating some of the core capability that you have. It could be from legacy systems tying into how you get data and information, and then also the architectural design and how that fits into current environment. On process, everything from, how do we pay our sellers now on this new business model that we built and developed, or it could be a decision-making framework. And then people around the transformation and the change and the shift that has to go into IoT, and sometimes it being a cultural shift and change. With all that said, what are some of the best practices that you've seen and/or guidance that you give to companies who are looking at deploying IoT solutions?
Yeah, I would kind of call attention to a key word you later, which is ecosystem, which is that, right, doing this because it does involve technology, people, process. There's a range of things in order to pull this off, and you can't necessarily assume that one company can do it all. And so you are going to need, technology solutions like what Azure provides, but you may also need service partners or integrators who can do some of that work. And you may also need just your own internal rework of existing processes to kind of better enable that. And I think that's really the probably proven path for success in this place is understanding the partnerships and the ecosystem that's needed to actually deliver value in a meaningful way, and not to assume that you can get it all just from one solution kind of solves it all. And of course, it's not software is at the core of it, but there's a core people and process aspect that drives all this. And if you have to kind of have those close in hand, because if you don't, your deployment's not going to kind of reach its maximum success, because it's not purely just a technical issue. That these other aspects have to be involved, because in many cases may involve a complete re-engineering of existing business processes that maybe your company has been using for decades, right? And that's a significant cultural shift that companies have to be prepared to address and deal with head on to be successful.
Excellent. Well stated, Merritt. And to recap again, the partnerships and ecosystems are key. The processes by which you develop and engage in building out your success for IoT, and overall that cultural investment in people. So, Merritt, with that, I want to say thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Great. Thanks, Rodney. I appreciate being a part of it.